Hello and welcome to part 2 of What If a Billionaire Invested in Russia. This time we have gone 5 years in the future from last episode, and we're going to have a look now and see exactly what has happened across Russian football. We'll briefly start off with the Russian national side. Moved to 14th in the world rankings. They're about 36th last time, I think. They would have had 2 Euros since we last visited. So if we go back to 2020, how do they do in these European Championships? If we move this competition thing across, we can see exactly how they've done. They got to the second round, lost to Northern Ireland of all sides after winning 2 games in the group and drawing against Portugal. So they must have topped their group, must have done pretty well. Then ended up losing to Northern Ireland, so they'll be very disappointed with that. The next few years were pretty decent. The 2022 World Cup looks like they didn't qualify for that through their group, which is probably quite... I don't understand why they've not qualified. They only lost 2 games there, so I guess they just didn't really do particularly well. Didn't get into the World Cup, but into the Euros since then. They qualified again, but this time get knocked out by Italy in the second round. So not so good for Russia internationally. A quick look at the Russian Premier League then. It's still sitting 6th in the overall rankings, so they've not moved up any further. And actually, if we look at this, they did move down to 7th in 2020, 8th in 2021 and in 2022, moving back up to 7th in 2023, 6th 2024, and I don't know if they've gone up or not yet. It's not really ticked over this past season, but again, they'll be disappointed with that, and I'm disappointed with that. I expected them to really chase these top 5, but they've not done it so far. Let's go back then the past 5 seasons, starting in 2020-21. Zenit St Petersburg win the title ahead of Spartak Moscow. Ruben Kazan there as well. CSKA Moscow and Arsenal Tula make up those teams in European football. Season afterwards, CSKA Moscow assert dominance once again, winning the title by 2 points from Zenit St Petersburg, and Spartak drop down to 3rd. Lokomotiv Moscow up there, so 3 of the Moscow clubs rather in the European competition, with Ruben Kazan making up 5th. 22-23, Ufa come out of nowhere. Were they even in it the season before that? Ufa. They came 7th the season before. Ufa. Not even heard of them. Have won the title out of nowhere. They got promoted in 2013-14, so they've not been in the Russian Premier League that long, but did manage to win a title one year, so well, fair play to them. They were only founded in 2010 apparently, although his first year is 2009. So I presume they were known as something else, says there, known as a place that I'm not going to try and pronounce, Dynamo, as something else. So Ufa doing pretty well, coming out of nowhere to win a title that season. Zenit in 2nd, Spartak 3rd, CSK 4th, and Ruben 5th. So we're sort of seeing a bit of a dominance now between some of these top sides that you actually sort of expect to win. No one really coming out of nowhere apart from Ufa to win a title or something like that. Season afterwards, Ufa, literally, I don't understand, they finished 12th the season afterwards. It must have been like a Leicester City sort of moment with them winning the title. CSK Moscow win the title once again. Spartak Moscow in 2nd, Ruben there. Lokomotiv Moscow and Akhmat have their highest finish since they actually finished in one of these continental places early on in the series. I have also noticed that Angie seems to be yo-yoing quite a bit. They go up and down an awful lot, do they? You know, I thought they had a lot of money in real life behind them. They didn't actually have that much when I changed it to £1 billion, because also they had Samuel Eto'o and were paying him ridiculous amounts of money at some points. And this season, we have Moscow win the title once again. They seem to be the best side at the moment so far. Spartak Moscow in 2nd. Ruben Kazan always seems to be in and around that top 4 sort of position. Zenit down to 4th. Lokomotiv Moscow this time in 5th. And Krasnodar must have won the cup to make sure they get 7th place and a Europa League place. Ufa recovered a little bit that season, finishing 9th. Akhmat just outside the European positions. They've done pretty well actually, Akhmat. I've been impressed with how they've been doing. I don't know how they actually are as a side in real life, but they seem to become a top half side at least since this experiment has started. So what kind of money are these Russian clubs paying? It turns out quite a lot in this first season. 2020, Kasper Dolberg moves from Real Madrid to Spartak for 55, rising to 78 million. Malang Sarr moves from Nice to Spartak Moscow. Richarlison goes to Lokomotiv Moscow, 31 million. There's 37.5 the transfer before. Godfred Doncer moved for another 12 million, 20 million there for more players. There's some big transfer fees being paid in 2020. Season afterwards, it calms down a little bit. Jordan Amavi moving from Marseille to CSK, and Juan Hernandez moving from Watford to CSK, both around the sort of 20 million mark, rising to 30 million. 2023, I think perhaps some of these guys are now regens maybe. This guy's not actually, he's quite old, he's 30 years old. He moves from Chelsea to 11 million. Quite low transfer fees actually in this year, 15 million and 10 million, rising to 15 million, the biggest transfers in 2023. Again, season afterwards, no massive transfers, I've got to say, 17 million, the highest fee there. So no like real commanding fees being spent, but Zenit, Lokomotiv Moscow seem to be the biggest spenders this year. And then this season we've just had the biggest transfers are actually players leaving. Richarlison goes to Liverpool for 28, rising to 41.5 million. Malang Sarr moves from Spartak to Man City for 26 million. So some big transfers leaving Russia, which is interesting and we need to take note of. Lokomotiv spend a lot of money, so does Spartak Moscow actually. Zenit are nowhere to be seen on this list apart from in selling players basically. Actually the same as CSKA Moscow, they're down here spending 4.1 as their biggest transfer. So maybe money is becoming a little bit of an issue after they originally splurged on a lot of players. Or maybe they're just relying on some homegrown players now. Perhaps the level of homegrown players is pretty decent and a lot of them are coming through that are quite decent now. I mean, just looking at this brief overview of player stats, you can see a few regens now popping up in these top things. So I guess like Miguel Ayala, on loan from Man City actually, so he's coming on loan. He's a pretty decent player. So there's a regen from Paraguay. Who else are we sort of looking at for regens? This guy, T. Markov, is Russian, is a regen of a Russian club, so that's pretty good. Chris Smith, probably not Russian, he's Scottish apparently. Came through the Ranger system, so some good regens coming through. Maybe not all from Russia, but this guy was from Russia. He looked pretty decent. Right, let's look at some European football now. We'll go back to the 2020 season in the Euro Cup. We're going to look down here then, see which sides are in it. CSKA Moscow there, they lose 3-0 to Bournemouth in Europe. That's kind of poor for them. They should be getting through that past Bournemouth, I'd imagine. Zenit are also there. They managed to beat RZ 3-0 on aggregate, but they're the only two Russian sides in it as far as I can see. So into the second knockout round, Zenit go, where they lose to Red Bull Leipzig 4-0 on aggregate. So not the best start. Season afterwards, two Russian clubs there, Spartak Moscow and CSKA Moscow. They both win. Spartak 5-1 against Copenhagen and 5-3 CSKA Moscow beat final, which is good stuff. So two teams into the second knockout round for the first time in this experiment. Spartak Moscow do pretty well. They beat Inter Milan 4-3. CSKA Moscow fall to Losk Lille though, which is kind of disappointing for them. So Spartak go through into the quarterfinals. The further we've seen a side go, but they get knocked out by Man City 4-0 on aggregate, so that's kind of poor. 22-23 season, CSKA Moscow there, but they lose to Lyon for 4-1 on aggregate. Lokomotiv Moscow there, they managed to beat Olympiacos on away goals 3-all. Zenit lose to Red Bull Salzburg 4-3 on aggregate, and that's all the Russian sides there. So Lokomotiv Moscow through, the other two knocked out. And Lokomotiv Moscow managed to get through past Sporting into the quarterfinals. They won 3-2 on aggregate. Quarter-final time, Lokomotiv Moscow win. They beat Ajax 3-2. The furthest we've seen a Russian side go now. Lokomotiv Moscow into the semi-finals, where they lose to Tottenham 4-1 on aggregate. Agonisingly close, but fantastic stuff from Lokomotiv. And finally, we're starting to get somewhere, I think, with these Russian clubs. Season afterwards then, the first knockout round of the 23-24 season. Any Russian clubs? Ufa are there, obviously. They won the title, obviously didn't get through their group in the Champions League, but obviously managed to come third, so they qualified for this. Lose, though, to Chelsea 6-1 on aggregate, so not the best start for the Russian sides. Any other Russian sides? Zenit there, they beat Bilbao 2-1, and CSKA Moscow beat Olympiacos 2-1 on aggregate as well. Spartak as well also get through 4-3 against Frankfurt. This is the most Russian sides that we've seen get through, I think actually in the first knockout round itself, and that get through into the second knockout round. Spartak lose to Standard Liège 4-3, unfortunately. CSKA Moscow get through on penalties, and Zenit lose to Arsenal. So only one team progressing, Spartak, into the quarterfinals, where they faced Standard Liège, who knocked out the Russian side last time. They lose 4-1 on aggregate to CSKA Moscow, though, which is pretty good. Another semi-final appearance for Russia. They lose to Arsenal on away goals of all things as well. That's so frustrating. They could have gone into the final against Chelsea, but agonisingly close. Well done to Russian sides. We're getting better. And then the season we have just had seems to be a few Russian sides in this one. Lokomotiv Moscow and Akhmat lose to Tottenham and Real San Sebastian respectively. Zenit St Petersburg at the top here get through against Genk. And then looking down towards the bottom of the list, Spartak Moscow there as well. They beat Besiktas 6-0 on aggregate, which is pretty good going. So two teams out of the four into the second knockout round, where Zenit lose to Galatasaray 1-0 on aggregate, and Spartak lose to Tottenham 2-0 on aggregate. So only as far as the second round in this past season for Russian clubs. But I think we've seen progress, and I think we can sort of be happy with that for this part of the experiment at least. Right, Champions League then, back to the 2020-21 season. We're going to go from the first knockout round, but no Russian sides appear in this first knockout round, which is very good. Season afterwards, again, no Russian sides. We seem to be going backwards a little bit in the Champions League because there were some Russian sides in it last episode. 22-23, again, no Russian sides, which is a worry. 23-24, no more Shakhtar Donetsk there. and they're from Ukraine. And of course, the Russian team should probably be better than the Shakhtar, the next team, I'd imagine. And then the season we've just had, no Russian side. So what is going on? We'll have a quick look through the group stages at these Russian sides that are getting there. There should be one guaranteed there every single time. CSKA Moscow came third in that first season, and Spartak Moscow come bottom of their group. Season afterwards, Zenit bottom of their group there, as you can see. Any more Russian sides? No more Russian sides there, just the Zenit. Season afterwards, looking down this list, CSKA Moscow third in their group, just missing out. No more Russian sides though. 23, 24, where are the Russian sides? Ufa third in their group, as we saw earlier on, of course. Only just third as well. Some must have been on games played, actually, because they had worse goal difference than Lazio. Any more Russian sides? No more Russian sides. And then the season we have just had, Russian sides, where are you? Third in their group, Spartak Moscow. So they're just not getting to the top two, which is a little bit frustrating. A quick look at the nation club coefficient shows that they are way ahead of like Portugal, Belgium, Ukraine, especially in this next season stats and things like that. However, there is a long way to go to catch up with France, Germany, Italy, and they have to be getting multiple teams into the knockout stages of both Champions and Europa League now for that to really catch up, I think, which is probably going to be a bit of an issue. So that's it for this episode. Next time we'll go another 5 years in the future, analyse things again, and we may have to put a bit more money into these clubs because I want to see a Russian side win a Champions League by the end of this experiment. So if you've enjoyed today's episode, make sure you do drop a like on the video, subscribe to the channel if you're new around here, and I will see you next time for some more Russian billionaire action.